You think you're deciding, but every step you take follows a design you've never seen. That pattern was mapped long before you were born, hidden in the most silent layers of your mind. Today, I'm going to reveal what Freud called the secret. Freud didn't believe our lives were guided only by conscious thought. He saw human behavior, especially the emotional patterns of the female mind, as lines traced in advance, etched by childhood bonds, early wounds, and buried memories that never truly die. He compared the mind to an iceberg, where only a small fraction shows above the surface. The rest, massive and hidden, moves quietly beneath, steering the entire structure. Whoever understands that submerged part doesn't need to fight for influence. They simply direct the currents. Hidden in Freud's less public notes is the idea that these submerged forces create an emotional script. Once written, it repeats, sometimes for decades, until you mistake it for destiny. The first male figures in a woman's life, fathers, protectors, mentors, become templates. Even when flawed, those templates can become the standard she unconsciously measures every bond against. This is where the danger begins, when the familiar is mistaken for safety, and the same emotional wounds are sought out again and again, not out of desire, but because the unconscious is addicted to recognition. Freud called this Wiederholungszwang, the compulsion to repeat. It's why people find themselves in the same type of relationship with the same type of betrayal, telling themselves it will be different this time. The truth is, the mind isn't seeking something new. It's searching for a resolution to an old story, and walking straight back into it. And here, Foucault's words strike like a warning. Power is most effective when the controlled believe they are acting of their own will. If someone learns the blueprint of your emotional patterns, they don't need to control your choices directly. They only need to create the conditions in which your unconscious will choose for them. The manipulation becomes invisible because it feels like home. A 2019 Harvard study confirmed this with chilling precision. Women's decision-making in moments of vulnerability can be shaped by emotional memories tied to authority figures, even when they believe they're thinking freely. Which means the most decisive factor in your present may not be reason, but a forgotten voice from your past. So the question becomes inevitable. If someone can read the map of your longings and your fears, can you still call your life your own? Today, we descend into those hidden layers, to the places Freud charted, but never exposed to the public. The lines of the secret cartography and the reason why breaking free starts with seeing the map. They told you your choices define you, but Freud would argue it's your repetitions that betray you. Look closely, and you'll notice the same scenes replaying, the same kind of person drawing you in, the same arguments, the same quiet disappointments that feel strangely familiar. That's not coincidence. That's the unconscious leading you, back to the only terrain it trusts, even if it's dangerous. In his private writings, Freud hinted at an emotional map that could predict these returns. It's not about fate or astrology, it's about a structure. The first emotional bonds in your life set coordinates deep in your mind. When you meet someone later who triggers those same coordinates, the map lights up, and you feel drawn to them without knowing why. It can feel like fate, but it's really gravity, pulling you into the orbit of what you already know. This is the hidden cost of emotional familiarity. It blinds you to the fact that you are moving in a circle. Every step feels like forward motion, but the scenery is the same because the path is closed. Freud called it Wiederholungszwang, repetition compulsion, a loop that doesn't stop until you become conscious of it. And here's the most unsettling part. Someone who knows your map can use it. They don't have to force you. They just have to position themselves at the point your mind is already traveling toward. That's the kind of control you never see coming. It's why some relationships feel inevitable, why some people seem to fit perfectly into your life from the start. Not because they're meant to, but because they've stepped into a role written long before you met them. And if they know how the script ends, they can lead you there without you ever questioning it. It's in moments like this, when you recognize the map may not be yours, that you have a choice, to keep walking it blindly or to learn its lines. That's what we're doing here, and if this journey is making you see yourself in ways you haven't before, stay close. Follow this page. It helps more than you imagine, not just to keep this alive, but to remind us both that these maps can be redrawn. Because the truth is, once you can name the pattern, you can step off the path. But until then, the path will keep finding you. The coordinates are already in place, and every face, every voice that feels just right, may only be right for the part of you that still lives in the past. That's the danger. And that's why we need to keep going deeper. Because the further we trace the lines, the closer we get to the place where you can choose something that isn't already written for you. You might think the most dangerous thing Freud ever wrote was in his published works. It wasn't. The real danger lives in the fragments he left between the lines, in notebooks that never made it into the public light. Sketches of what he believed was a subterranean map of the female psyche. Not a map made of streets or rivers, but of impulses, fears, and attractions that run like hidden tunnels beneath the surface of conscious life. Freud observed that certain emotional reactions were not isolated incidents. They were landmarks. A certain tone of voice could pull someone back into the emotional atmosphere of their childhood. A particular kind of attention could create the same magnetic pull as the first bond that ever made them feel safe, or the first one that ever broke them. These were not random triggers. They were coordinates. And the same coordinates showed up across different women, across different lives, repeating in ways too consistent to be dismissed. This was the beginning of what he privately called the emotional script. The script is written early, often, before you have language to name it. It is not stored as logic. It's stored as sensation, as memory in the body, which is why you can walk into a room, meet a stranger, and feel as if you've known them forever, not because you actually have, but because they match the silhouette of someone your unconscious has been searching for since you were a child. Here lies the double edge of the map. What makes you feel seen can also make you vulnerable. When the coordinates align, you open the door yourself. You lean in, you trust, you surrender, not realizing the trust was never earned in the present, but borrowed from the past. And if the person standing in front of you understands this, they don't need to persuade you. They just need to resemble the original key. Freud suspected, and his later followers confirmed, that these patterns could be used to predict behavior with unsettling accuracy. Not just in relationships, but in decisions that feel unrelated. Who you listen to, who you forgive, who you fight for. The map isn't limited to love. It extends to loyalty, to what you'll risk, and to what you'll silently endure. What makes this so hard to escape is that the map feels like identity. To question it feels like questioning who you are. And here's the trap. The moment you defend a pattern because that's just how I am, you've stopped asking whether it's really you, or the script talking. This is why the map stays hidden. Not because it's invisible, but because it's disguised as you. It's no wonder Freud kept these ideas mostly out of the public view. To reveal them would have been to admit that much of what we call personality is, in fact, choreography, a set of steps taught by early experience, and performed for the rest of our lives unless we unlearn them. And unlearning is dangerous to any system that relies on predictability to maintain control. So here's the question you should be asking. If this subterranean map exists, who already knows how to read yours? Because the moment you realize someone does, you'll start to see that not every coincidence is random, and not every connection is safe. And that's where the real work begins, not in burning the map, but in redrawing it so no one else can use it against you. You've been told your freedom lies in your ability to choose. But Freud would argue that most of what you call choice is nothing more than an unconscious impulse dressed in the language of reason. The idea that you are the master of your own house, as he put it, is an illusion. Because the house has rooms you've never opened, and those rooms are the ones making the real decisions. We like to believe that our minds are neutral grounds, where reason and emotion negotiate, and we sign the final contract. But the truth is, by the time you decide, most of the groundwork has already been laid in silence. The way you interpret a person's tone, the trust you extend without proof, the gut feeling that tells you to stay or leave, these reactions are rooted in layers of memory that you never consciously agreed to. They come from the emotional coordinates set in your earliest relationships long before you could name them as good or bad. And here's where the myth becomes dangerous. When the unconscious impulse aligns with someone else's agenda, it feels like your own will. You don't resist because you believe you're acting freely. In reality, you've simply followed the most well-worn path in your inner landscape, a path that leads exactly where it has always led. If someone has studied your patterns, they don't need to convince you. They just place themselves in your path, knowing you will walk toward them without hesitation. Freud's statement, "We are not masters in our own house," is not meant to strip away hope. It's a warning. The unconscious doesn't just influence you, it organizes you. It decides which faces you find trustworthy, which voices you obey, which situations feel safe or dangerous. And these decisions happen in microseconds, without the courtesy of explanation. You only notice the outcome, never the process. This is why manipulation at this level is almost impossible to detect. It doesn't feel like coercion. It feels like self-direction. You think you're moving toward what you want, but in reality, you're moving toward what you've been conditioned to want. That's why breaking free is so hard. You're not just rejecting a person or situation, you're rejecting a version of yourself that feels authentic, even if it's only a reflection of the past. There's a reason why those who understand this mechanism rarely need force. Power, at its most effective, is invisible. And when a woman mistakes the pull of an old pattern for a rational decision, she will defend that decision as fiercely as she would defend her own name. The defense is part of the trap. To escape the myth of free choice, you have to be willing to hold your own instincts up to the light and ask, is this really mine? Or is it the echo of someone else's voice speaking through me? That question is unsettling, because it risks unraveling the stories you tell yourself about who you are. But without it, the myth remains intact, and the map in your mind remains unchallenged. And maybe that's the point. True freedom doesn't begin when you start making choices. It begins when you can tell the difference between choice and conditioning, and when you can walk away from the path that feels right, simply because you recognize it's the one you were never meant to follow again. Desire is the most persuasive jailer you will ever meet. Freud saw it not simply as a force that liberates, but as one that can bind you more effectively than fear ever could. The paradox is simple. What you crave can be the same thing that keeps you from leaving, even when the walls are closing in. This is why he viewed desire as a kind of golden shackle, beautiful, seductive, and nearly impossible to question while it's locked around your wrists. Desire doesn't just pull you towards someone or something. It rearranges your perception so that everything outside of its orbit fades into irrelevance. Once that happens, the object of desire gains power, not because it demands authority, but because you voluntarily hand it over. This is how emotional seduction becomes a strategic weapon. The more convinced you are that you are freely giving, the less you realize you are also surrendering. Freud believed this was rooted in the same unconscious patterns that govern all attachments. The kind of desire that takes your breath away is rarely born in the present. It's an echo of a longing planted long before you knew what longing was. Someone who resembles the shape of that original figure, in mannerisms, in energy, in the way they notice or ignore you, will awaken the script without you recognizing it. The pull feels chemical, magnetic, undeniable. And that's exactly why it's so dangerous. The shackle is golden because it doesn't look like restraint. It looks like the thing you've been waiting for all your life. And because it feels rare, you protect it. Even if protecting it means protecting the very dynamic that is holding you in place. This is where seduction turns into control. When someone learns exactly how to embody your idealized image, they can shape your beliefs, your boundaries, and your dependencies without ever having to ask directly. This is not limited to romantic love. The golden shackle can be a mentor whose approval you seek, a friend whose opinion you weigh above your own, a group whose acceptance you fear losing. In every case, the pattern is the same. The moment your sense of worth becomes tethered to someone else's response, they hold the key, and they can turn it without you realizing the lock exists. The tragedy, Freud might say, is that most people will never attempt to break the shackle, because the thought of losing the beauty that comes with it feels worse than the cost of staying bound. You tell yourself you can manage it, that you can enjoy the pleasure and ignore the control. But the truth is, the two are inseparable. The very thing that makes you feel alive is the thing that keeps you from walking away. Freedom from the golden shackle doesn't come from rejecting desire altogether. It comes from separating the desire that is yours from the desire that was planted. That's a painful process, because it forces you to confront the possibility that some of your most intoxicating moments were never truly about the present. They were reenactments, stage plays for a longing that has been running the same script for years. And here's the harshest truth. As long as the shackle remains, you will mistake its weight for meaning. You will call it passion, loyalty, even love. But once you see it for what it is, a perfect instrument of control, you will understand that no matter how beautiful it looks, no chain made of gold is worth keeping. The most effective trap is the one you walk into willingly, convinced it's a doorway to something new. Freud knew this well when he described the phenomenon of Wiederholungszwang, the compulsion to repeat. It's not a flaw in logic, but a gravitational pull in the unconscious, dragging you back to the same stage, with the same roles, even if the costumes change. You think you've made a different choice, but the ending has already been written. This compulsion isn't about nostalgia or sentimentality, it's about resolution that never comes. When an early emotional wound is left open, abandonment, betrayal, conditional affection, the psyche doesn't simply move on. Instead, it seeks out situations that mirror the original hurt, as if trying to rewrite the outcome. You return to the same kind of person, the same dynamic, hoping that this time the ending will be different. But instead of healing, the wound deepens, because the stage is set for the same collapse. This is why repetition is such a perfect tool for control. Once someone understands your pattern, they don't need to overpower you. They only need to present themselves as the opportunity your unconscious has been waiting for. You will walk toward them, not because of who they are in reality, but because of who they appear to be in your internal script. The pull feels like intuition, but it's really muscle memory, the emotional kind. In relationships, this is particularly insidious. The manipulator doesn't have to create the desire, they only have to fit the mold. The way they look at you, the way they withdraw at just the right moment to trigger pursuit, the balance between attention and distance, all of it tailored to mirror what is already familiar to you. It doesn't matter if that familiarity comes from love or from pain. What matters is that your unconscious recognizes it and moves toward it. And because the pattern feels personal, this is just my type. This is who I'm drawn to. You defend it. You rationalize it. You build elaborate justifications for why this time is different. In truth, the compulsion is pulling the strings, and you're following choreography written long before you could choose your own steps. The tragedy of the Repetition compulsion is that it masquerades as hope. Each time you believe the story can have a different ending. This belief keeps you invested, even when the signs point to the same inevitable collapse. The manipulator counts on this. They know that as long as you believe in the possibility of change, you will keep engaging, keep forgiving, keep returning, which makes the cycle self-sustaining. Breaking free from this trap requires a brutal kind of honesty, recognizing that your emotional attraction to certain dynamics isn't proof of compatibility, but evidence of an unresolved wound. This means you must confront the reality that what feels like love may, in fact, be a reenactment, that what feels magnetic is, sometimes, just the pull of an old injury begging to be repeated. Freud would argue that awareness is the first rupture in the cycle. Once you can identify the pattern, you can resist the automatic pull toward it. But until then, the repetition compulsion remains the perfect prison, one where the prisoner not only stays voluntarily, but insists the walls are doors. If control were only about strength, it would be easy to see and resist. But the most refined form of domination doesn't overpower you. It builds you. It studies the architecture of your emotions, then carefully adjusts the foundations until you can no longer tell where you end and the influence begins. Freud understood this through the study of repression, the way early experiences, especially those in childhood, are buried in the unconscious, yet remain active like dormant machinery. To engineer vulnerability is to know exactly which of those buried mechanisms can be switched on. This process starts by identifying the emotional triggers that bypass logic. A tone of voice, a kind of touch, a rhythm of attention and withdrawal. Each can be calibrated to awaken the memory of a relationship that once made you feel safe, or, conversely, deeply afraid. In either case, the trigger opens a door to the unconscious, and whatever steps through will be met without your usual defenses. The manipulator doesn't have to create the vulnerability. They just have to find the doorway you've been keeping unlocked for years. Freud's work intersects here with Foucault's concept of normalization. Once a certain pattern of domination is repeated enough times, it stops feeling like oppression and starts feeling like care. The engineering works because it doesn't demand immediate submission. Instead, it blends control into your sense of what is ordinary, acceptable, even loving. Over time, you stop questioning the power dynamics because they no longer register as unusual. The most sophisticated form of this engineering involves recreating the emotional climate of your formative years. If you grew up having to earn affection, they will make you work for their approval, offering just enough reward to keep you trying. If you learn to equate chaos with passion, they will ensure there's always a little instability, just enough to keep you chasing moments of peace. The familiarity is the hook. You accept the discomfort because you've lived in it before, and part of you believes you know how to survive it. This is why engineering vulnerability is more dangerous than any overt act of manipulation. It doesn't feel foreign. It feels like coming home. And that's the trap. Once the emotional environment feels familiar, you lower your guard. You stop looking for exit signs because you're not convinced you need them. In this state, control is effortless. You begin to anticipate the other person's needs, adjust yourself to their moods, and rationalize away your own discomfort. Freud might say that in these moments, you're no longer interacting with the present. You're reliving the past, acting out old roles with new actors. The stage is the same, the lines are almost identical, but you believe you're improvising. This belief is what keeps you from breaking the pattern, because to do so would require questioning not just the relationship, but the emotional logic you've carried your entire life. Breaking free from engineered vulnerability demands a confrontation with that logic. It requires looking at the care you receive and asking whether it nourishes or confines you. It means recognizing when attention is being used as currency, when comfort is conditional, and when love is structured as a transaction. Only then can you begin to dismantle the architecture that was built to keep you in place. Until that happens, the engineering holds, quiet, precise, invisible. You will feel seen, understood, even cherished. But beneath that warmth is a blueprint. And the blueprint was never drawn for your freedom. Jung once said, "What you resist persists and governs." That's the cruel symmetry of the maps we've traced together. The patterns you refuse to see don't disappear. They take the wheel. They choose the roads. They decide who gets to enter your life and how the story will end. Ignoring them is not freedom, it's surrender. Nietzsche's warning echoes here like a final verdict. What is required to enslave a man? Give him a chain he calls freedom. The most effective control is the kind you defend. And if the chain is made of what you've always longed for, love, attention, belonging, you will guard it from anyone who tries to break it. That is the paradox you must confront. The prison built from your own desires will feel safer than any open door. Through Freud's lens, we've seen that the real battlefield isn't in the visible gestures, the spoken words, or the dramatic conflicts. It's in the unseen coordinates, the childhood bonds that wrote the first drafts of your emotional life, the repetitions that disguise themselves as new beginnings, the seductions that slip past logic because they wear the mask of familiarity. This is the cartography of domination, a control so deep it doesn't need to be enforced. It's self-sustaining. The hardest truth is this: no one can take the key from you because you've been holding it the whole time. You hand it over while you sleep. You give it away in the name of love, in the hope of belonging, in the belief that someone else can complete what you've been missing. And as long as you do, the map will keep leading you back to the same locked door. But there is another path. It begins not with rebellion, but with clarity, tracing the lines of your own map until you can see where they lead, and choosing with full awareness to draw new ones. That choice will cost you. It will demand the loss of illusions that once gave you comfort, and the dismantling of stories you've told yourself for years. But in their place comes something no one can manufacture for you, a freedom that is not granted and therefore cannot be taken away. So ask yourself, before the pattern repeats again, whose map have you been following? And what would it take for you to stop walking it? The answer won't be found in someone else's approval or in waiting for the right person to arrive. It will be found the moment you decide that no matter how beautiful the chain, you will not wear it. The real dominion is not imposed by the jailer. It's built in the invisible cartography of your fears and desires. And the moment you learn to read it, you become the one holding the pen, not the jailer who holds the key, but you, who hands it over in your sleep. If this journey has made you see your own map differently, tell me what part of it struck you the hardest. Leave a comment and follow this page. It helps more than you imagine, and it keeps us tracing these hidden lines together until they no longer lead you back to the same locked door.